Before we get your thoughts, though, let's talk to Lord Timothy Kirkhope, Conservative peer, former immigration minister, former Tory leader in the European Parliament, also a former Home Affairs spokesperson in Brussels. Lord Kirkhope, is this something, you think the government's doing the right thing here?
No, I don't. But on the other hand, they do have the powers to proceed with sort of military installations in almost any way they like. And we do have a little bit of a precedent in terms of changing the status of these sort of bases when they're no longer required for the military into prison facilities or other facilities of a social nature. But I just wish we weren't in this situation, and I don't think we need to be. And it is worrying me a lot about the whole approach the government is taking to both asylum seekers and also the general question of immigration, which I think is going to lay up an awful lot of extra problems for us as we go on if they continue with these policies.
What would your alternative be, Lord Kirkhope?
Well, there are loads of alternatives that just haven't been tried, frankly, and it does worry me. First of all, it is correct, whatever the courts might be saying on a sort of domestic point that's been raised, it's against international law, first of all, that where someone claims asylum, a location where they claim, that case isn't dealt with in that particular place. And the idea of sending people to Rwanda was never going to work, in my opinion. And I am a lawyer, but not a lefty one. So it's never
and
going
indeed,
to
and there are a lot we should say. I mean, it gets a bit frustrating when we talk about lefty lawyers. I mean, there are also plenty of lawyers. I mean, it's not...
Okay, we have enough lawyers, I can tell you. We certainly do. But the point is, in international law, having worked on this in Brussels as well, historically, I know for a fact that it is against international law for someone who applies for asylum in place A to simply be refused a chance of making that application and chucked out to a place B, where not only would they make their application, but if it were successful, they would have to stay in that place rather than come back here. It's internationally unacceptable. But what I feel is so important is that we just have not yet dealt with the biggest issue of all, and that is the people who are turning up in this country, whether it be to claim asylum or coming here as illegal immigrants or whatever, their cases are simply not being dealt with. When I was minister, I did quite a few things wrong, I've no doubt, when I was immigration minister. But the one thing that I put resources into and concentrated on was turning around cases quickly. And where people did not meet the international criteria for asylum, we removed them from Britain fast. And where they did not meet our migration rules when they were coming here for economic reasons as migrants, again, they were removed. I put a lot of time into that. So this idea that we have to have thousands and thousands of people in various locations which local communities don't want seems to me to be not the answer. The answer is to make sure we turn people around quickly. And the second thing is, for goodness sake, let's negotiate with our colleagues in Europe a little bit better than we're doing at the moment. I mean, I find it quite appalling, having been one of the authors of a thing called the Dublin Agreement, which allowed EU countries to move people between countries in Europe. We're no longer in the EU, therefore we don't have that available. But the next best thing is to negotiate an associated arrangement with it, so at the very least, we can move people back to other safe countries in Europe with agreement. And I think that's something that we should have done straight away, instead of having this great nationalism, this great argument that, we are wonderful, that no one's going to come here anymore because they'll be put off by the prospects of being shipped out of here to some part of Africa. It's not working at the moment. Even the threat isn't working. And as I said, I don't think it's going to work in the future either.
Well, just to give people context in terms of the numbers that you talked about in terms of the backlog, I mean, it really is extraordinary. I mean, back in the number currently waiting up to December 2022 to have their asylum application processed is now over 160,000. Majority of those people have been waiting more than 6 months, and that is an increase since December 2017 of more than 408%. I mean, that is a shocking failure of government, isn't it?
I'll tell you what else is frightening, Lewis. Another thing that frightens me enormously is that when people have their asylum applications looked at in this country, a very high proportion of them seem to be being granted refugee status. Now, it's not that I don't want people to be looked after who have a genuine fear for their lives, but I would say to you that when I was immigration minister, people applying for asylum had to meet very tight criteria, and the number that actually met that was quite small. The percentages, instead of being, I think it's something like 70% now, 60 or 70%, it used to be something like 15%.
What do you think's changed? I mean, is it just instability in the world has become worse? There are more failed states since then? What do you think it is?
No, this is turning it on its head slightly, and we are not actually being strict enough about those criteria anymore. And that may be because of the sheer pressure of numbers and the wish that, the government has to have people processed, but it's not happening quick enough. I just don't see why we can't deal with an asylum application very quickly indeed. It's either going to meet those criteria of the 51 Convention, the UN Convention, or it's not. And if it's not, the people have to be removed. Now, that may sound harsh, but of course, I always believed in a very fair approach to immigration and asylum. Fair but firm was a term which I invented when I was the Home Office minister. But I just don't see it happening right now. And some of the things that government ministers are saying are also fanning a lot of resentment, fanning a lot of flames, and harming good community relations.
But isn't it the point, look, in terms of what's happened to your party on this, is that is it not the case that this obsession with Rwanda, the idea that Rwanda is going to be this panacea, it was never, as you already alluded to, it was never going to be, even if it were working and operating, it was never going to be, in terms of the numbers that could be absorbed, it would be, really very, very small. But the obsession with that is just a massive distraction from looking at actual solutions that could work.
You're right. And of course, the thing is, they give Australia as an example of where it's been successful, that people have been shipped away into some distant part of the world rather than going to Australia. But Australia is exactly different to us in many, many respects of its location and everything. The other thing is, of course, that the Rwanda deal, or so-called deal that was done, allowed the Rwandans, this is the biggest irony of the lot, it allowed the Rwandans to move some applications for asylum to them, to us.
Yes. Yeah,
but there's no number being put on that. And of course, the real irony would be if nobody leaves us for Rwanda, but we suddenly find we've got several hundred people coming here from Rwanda for whom we have to provide asylum.
Another triumph of British government. You mentioned there around the rhetoric from the Conservative Party. What do you have? Do you have Suella Braverman in mind in particular around that?
Well, I think, I do, I'm afraid. I'm very sad to say that, because Home Secretaries, so far as I have come across them over many, many years, and particularly Conservative ones, have adopted the approach of being firm but fair, but also they've taken an approach to something as sensitive as immigration, which has been a cool and a calm approach to it, and not, as it were, whipping up the sort of feelings of people. Whether it's for political reasons or personal reasons, I have no idea, but I really wish we wouldn't do that.
Do you think she's been irresponsible?
I think there's a level of irresponsibility in that approach, and I don't think it helps. It doesn't help the people who might be genuinely wanting to come to this country and genuinely in need of asylum, nor does it help the British people as a whole, who frankly are, I think, rather confused, to say the least.
Former Conservative Party Chair Saida Varsi, over the last 24 hours, has denounced what she termed racist rhetoric from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Would you go that far? Do you agree with that?
I probably won't go that far, but I certainly think that Saida Varsi, who has vast experience of community relations and also was a chair of our party, she must have good reason to be saying this, and I'm not going to criticise her either.
Lord Timothy Kirkhope, Conservative peer, former immigration minister, as I say, former Tory leader in the European Parliament as well, talking about Rwanda, and really extraordinary. I mean, you can see the split in the Conservative Party right there in terms of Suella Braverman on the one hand, people like Saida Varsi, we'll talk about more in a minute, and Lord Kirkhope on the other. But what do you think? Do you think